Welcome to the Gracepoint Church podcast. Here at Gracepoint, we believe in meeting people where they are and inspiring them to follow Jesus. Join us now for this week's episode.
Okay, so heads I propose to her, tails I don't. Order the buckler and shield and prepare for battle.
Well, as we wrap up our series, What Do You Want Me to Do, God?, where we've been talking about how we can make better decisions, we've been really coming along over these last few weeks with this big idea that the decisions that we make today determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. And we all recognize this because the stories that we tell today are based on the decisions that we've made in the past. In fact, one of the things that we have been saying is that while we make our decisions also make us. In other words, who we are today, our experience, our character, our attitude towards life, so many things about who we are today are why they are because of the decisions that you and I have made in the past. And one of the things that I think that you're going to see is that as you start to see how God works in your personal decision-making process, many of you are going to start to feel a call to something new. A call for you to leave your comfort zone, to leave this place in your life where everything feels fine, everything feels good, and to step out in faith and to do something new. For some of you, that pull might be to start school again, to jump back into that educational field, into that career that you wanted to do before. It might be a brand new field. But for some of you, that might be that pull that you're feeling right now. For some of you, it might be to go and start working out at the gym. For some of you, it might be to find a new job or to start looking for a new job. For others, it might be that there is just a pull on your life right now to really start to sacrifice and devote part of your time to serving here at Gracepoint or to serve at your local church. It might be a pull for you to really start trusting God with your finances and to begin tithing. It might be a pull for you to really reevaluate what your dating life looks like. But whatever it is, it's going to be a call for you to step away from wherever you feel safe and to step forward into something that's brand new. Now, for too many people, it's the start that stops you. It's the whole process, the whole idea of having to start that stops you from ever starting anything. And, you'll never be able to get to this point where you're going to finish something if you never start something. I remember early on in life when I was single, and even in the first few years of when I was married, I had a lot of personal debt. I had a lot of debt. In fact, I was living in a culture, and the culture told me and taught me that one of the ways that you knew you were successful was when you had a lot of credit cards. And if you had a lot of credit cards, it means that there were companies out there that saw value in you. But as I got older and as God granted me wisdom and I got wiser through experiences and through really seeing how detrimental having debt can be on your finances and on your relationships, we realized we had to get out of debt. And so we had to start somewhere with that. And if you look at the amount of debt and you think to yourself, how am I ever going to reach that? You reach it by taking that first step. And so we decided, you know what, we're not going to go out to eat for a while. We're just going to cook at home. We're not going to go out to movies for a while. We're going to entertain ourselves at home. We're not going to go out and buy unnecessary things. In fact, we're going to start looking at some of the unnecessary things that are all around us and start selling some of those things. We had to decide, listen, we are going to put a plan into place. And then we attack that debt. And today we are debt-free and live debt-free because we made that decision years ago to start. And you hear stories like this and of people who've done these amazing things, who've gotten out of debt, who have completely changed their marriage or their relationship, who have lost a lot of weight. And we look at them and we hear their stories and we wonder, how in the world were they able to do that? I don't know how to do that. And because we don't know how to do that, we don't know exactly what it's going to feel like, we don't know exactly what the process is going to look like step by step, we end up not getting to the end because we never start. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to let the start stop us from doing what we are wanting to do, what we feel that call, that urge to do. And so if that's you, if you're feeling that today, I just want to take this moment here to encourage you that inside you is already the faith to start. It's already there. Now today, as we wrap up this series, I want to take a look at the life or something that happened in the life of a man who lived a long, long time ago. This man's name was Nehemiah. And Nehemiah lived, he lived about 600 years. Well, no, not 600 years. He lived about 450, 500 years before Jesus was born. And so let me give you some background on what was happening before this particular event in Nehemiah's life. About 600 years before Jesus was born, God was having this conversation with his people. We sometimes call them the children of Israel. And Israel at this time wasn't referring to a place, it was referring to a man. There was a man named Israel, and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his family became a nation. And we call them the Israelites, or the children of Israelites, the children of Israel. And God was talking to the children of Israel. He was talking to them, and he said, listen, I want you to take these commandments that I have given you, these rules that will help you live a life of freedom with each other. And I want you to obey them. Because if you do, you're going to be blessed. I want you to follow me. He said, I want you to be my people, and I want to be your God. And at first they said, yes, absolutely, we're going to do that. But then slowly over the years, they started to drift. And the Israelites began worshiping false gods, and they began doing things that they said that they weren't going to do, but they did them anyway. And they stopped doing things that they said that they were going to do. And so God told them, hey, listen, you have got to, figure out what exactly it is that you want, because if you keep wandering away from me, you're going to be outside of my protection. And they continued to wander, and they were outside of God's protection. And God allowed the Babylonians, an empire that was far away, but he allowed the Babylonians to come in to destroy the capital city, to destroy Jerusalem, and to take all of the Israelites into captivity. Well, they were in captivity and exile in Babylon for a long, long time. And if you fast forward about 140 years, you look now at 140 years later, the city of Jerusalem was still in ruins. The wall that all city-states, all nations had as a source of protection and to define their territory, the wall around Jerusalem was still down. It had never been rebuilt. Even though there were some people now living in Jerusalem, the wall had never been rebuilt. And because the wall had never been rebuilt, the city and the inhabitants of the city were vulnerable to anybody who wanted to come in and attack the city and to steal from the city and to take things from the city. And this city, which was supposed to be the city that God resided in, the temple where God lived and where people could have access to God through that temple, laid in ruins. And it was an embarrassment for the people who were there. And the Israelites who were still there, they looked around and they said, we have to do something. We have to rebuild this city. And so Nehemiah, who had never been to Jerusalem before, because he had been born while the Israelites were in exile, Nehemiah heard about what was happening in Jerusalem and about what happened to the city of his ancestors. And he said, Something needs to be done. I've got to do something. You see, Nehemiah felt the Spirit's pull. And we talked about that in episode 2, how you're going to feel the Spirit's pull. Some of you felt this. You felt that urge inside you that you just can't shake. You see something or someone and you think to yourself, somebody has to do something about that. And inside you, there's a voice that says, it might as well be you. You should be the one to do something about that. And so here's Nehemiah. And he's considering his city where his ancestors lived. And this wall that had not been rebuilt for 140 years. And Nehemiah is not the person that many of us, if we were thinking we have to rebuild the wall around the city, the person who we would call is probably not Nehemiah. You see, Nehemiah's job, Nehemiah's role, his purpose in life up to this point was to be the cupbearer to the king. Now, we don't really have cupbearers anymore, but what the cupbearer would do, his primary job was to basically die before the king dies, right? The job of the cupbearer was to drink and to taste everything before the king dies. And so basically any food that the king was given, the cupbearer the cupbearer would drink it first, and then the king would kind of look at him, and if after a couple of minutes he's still alive, still feeling good, then he knew it would be probably safe for him to eat and to drink also. That was what Nehemiah did. Nehemiah wasn't a builder. He wasn't a contractor. He had no experience in building a wall. And so if he were to look at this, he probably looked at this whole idea of rebuilding a wall around an entire city and thought to himself, man, where in the world do I start? How do I begin doing this thing? And so the first thing that he does, and this is one of the things that we need to look at and really use this as a model for how we deal with these decisions that we make and these pulls that we have to do something. The first thing that he does is he takes it to God. He takes it to God. He prays this prayer, and basically this is what he says. He says, Lord, God of heaven, and he says, you're great and you're an awesome God. Right? He's reminding God, listen, I know who you are. You're the God of heaven, and you're an awesome God. And then he pleads with him, please listen to my prayers. And the next thing he does is he says, listen, I'm going to confess to you, I sinned. And I'm not just confessing my sins, but I'm confessing all of the sins of all of the people of Israel. We've sinned. We didn't do the things that you told us to do. But then he reminded God of promises that God made to other people. He said, remember that promise you made to Moses? Well, if you made that promise to Moses, you can make that promise to me too. And so what I want you to do is, I want you to give me success as I go to the king, because I'm going to go to the king and ask for permission for me to go and rebuild this wall. And the only way the king is going to give me permission is if you intervene. I want you, God, to go and make the king like me. Make the king give me favor. I need you to go ahead of me and make the king be nice to me. So Nehemiah starts with a prayer. And then he takes that first step. He goes to the king and he asks for permission. And I can't imagine what that conversation was like for him, because he's the cupbearer. And he goes to the king and he says, okay, king, listen, you got to just hear me out, right? Don't judge right away. Hear me out. I need something from you. I need your blessing. I want to go from here from Susa, which is where the king was and where the head of the kingdom was. And he says, I want to go from Susa here to Jerusalem, which is about 850 miles away. And I, a professional cupbearer, I, who've never done anything remotely like rebuilding anything, I want to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall around the city of Jerusalem. Not for you, king. I want to rebuild the city around, the wall around the city, because I want to redeem the reputation of my people, and I want to redeem the reputation of my God. This is what he went to the king for. And he says to the king, would you let me do that? And because he prayed that prayer, God answered his prayer, and he had favor with the king. And so the king says, yes, go. In fact, not only am I going to let you go, I'm going to give you some money, I'm going to give you some stuff, and I am going to give you free transport. I'm going to give you letters to take so that you can get through to where you want to go without any problems. And Nehemiah was just like, wow. Because you see, as Jesus followers, when we feel the Spirit's pull, when we feel that pull in a direction to do something big, and let me qualify that word big, because big means different things to different people. See, for you, big might mean that you should go and you should start a life group for women. For you, big might mean it's time to start a new business, that there's this business idea that's been bouncing around in your brain for months, maybe years, and it's time for you to start doing that. For you, big might mean to really intentionally attack paying off your student loans or your credit card debt or maybe even your mortgage. For you, big might mean that you want to come and you want to start a men's ministry. Big might mean that you want to start taking the steps to become a godly husband to your wife and a godly father to your children. See, big doesn't mean huge. Big means significant. And so today, as we look at Nehemiah's story and we apply that to us, when we feel that pull, when we feel that the Spirit pulling us to do something big, to do something significant, to do something that can be life-changing for ourselves or for someone else, when we look at how do we do something big, today I want to talk about 3 steps that we take to do something big in our lives, to do something big for God. And the first step is this, is that we start small. I love this passage in the book of Zechariah where he says, do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. So have you ever watched a parent when they are watching their child take their very first step? His step, her first step. Have you ever watched this experience? Because it's really a great thing. The child is walking and is taking steps, but they are by no means a proper step. They're bouncing around like this, right? And you're just thinking any second now, that leg is going to give out, or that kid is going to be leaning way too much to one side. And the kid maybe takes a couple of steps, and then 3 seconds later, he lands on his butt. And what do the parents do? The parents cheer. They scream. There's big smiles on their faces. They grab the kid and hold it and tell the kid how proud they are for taking that first step that was really a very ugly step. But to the parents, it was a very beautiful step. And God is the same way with you and me. See, when we take that first step, He rejoices. He rejoices because He knows that the only way that we can really take that first step is if we take that step in faith. And so we take that first step. You know, Nehemiah went, and he went to build that wall. And when we read that entire account, and you can find it if you look in the scriptures in the book of Nehemiah, is starting with Nehemiah chapter 1. It tells this story of Nehemiah rebuilding the wall. And if we read it through, what we find is that Nehemiah was successful. He built the wall. It was an impossible task, and he did it. But listen, if we take a step back from the celebration of them rebuilding the wall, if we take a step back, what we see was that while they were having to build the wall, that there were people who were coming against them. That not only did they have to build, but they also had to fight. In fact, he had to go to all of the people. He went all around the city, and he told them, listen, this is how important it is that we have to build that wall, and at the same time, we have to protect the wall from the people who are trying to attack us. And so there were people who were working on that wall that had a tool in one hand and a sword in the other hand. That they literally were armed while they were working on the wall because they had to be ready to defend the wall at any moment. But if we take another step back from that to the place where the king said, okay, you can go. If we look at that point, Nehemiah didn't get permission from the king and then just leave. Nehemiah took 3 days. He had to investigate. He had to see what the lay of the land was. But if we go from that point and we take another step back, we see that Nehemiah has to travel from Susa, which is where the capital was, from Susa to Jerusalem, 850 miles. Now, if you live here in the San Francisco Bay Area, let me tell you what 850 miles is. 850 miles is from here, where we are at Gracepoint Church, from here to Bakersfield. And then from Bakersfield to Las Vegas. And then from Las Vegas to the Grand Canyon. That is 850 miles. That is the trip that Nehemiah had to make. 850 miles. But if we were to take a step back from that trip, take another step back, you know what we would see? We would see Nehemiah packing up his stuff. He would be packing a suitcase. He would be grabbing his toothbrush. He would be grabbing I don't know if they would, a week's set of underwear, socks. I don't know all of the things that they brought. Some suntan lotion, a razor. Nehemiah was packing his bags. It was the very first step on this journey. He did the very first thing. He took that very first step. And if you want to do something big, if you want to accomplish something big in your life, if you want to accomplish something big for God, you have to have the faith to start small. Nehemiah gathered the officials and the priests and the nobles of the land, and this is what he said to them. He said, "But now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace." Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, "Let's rebuild the wall." So they began the good work. Now, in this passage, here's the interesting thing. Nehemiah still didn't know all the details. When he was talking to the people, he didn't know how everything was going to go. He didn't know all of the steps that it took to get to the end. But he felt the Spirit's pull, and he knew that there was going to be a lot of uncertainty. But he took that very first step in faith. You see, here's the thing. You don't have to have the faith to finish. You just have to have the faith to start. And when you have the faith to start and you take it step by step, each step grows and adds on and builds on the faith and gives you the faith that you need to finish. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, I don't want to start small. Listen, starting small doesn't mean thinking small. If you want to do something big, if you want to accomplish something big, you've got to think big. But you've got to start small. Years ago, we had a vision for our church. We had a vision to be a different kind of church in this community because we recognized that there were a lot of good churches in our city, but there weren't a lot of good churches that were focused on reaching people who didn't want anything to do with the church. And so we had this vision to start a church where unchurched people would love to be a part of. That was our vision. And in the beginning, we thought, okay, everything's great. We're going to just move along. And some weeks we'd spend all this time getting everything set up and 10 people would show up. Some weeks we spent all this time getting everything set up and 2 people showed up. Some weeks no one showed up. And we would get everything set up, and then everyone who helped set up would sit down and it would just be us. And sometimes I would think to myself, and I know this is horrible, but sometimes I would think to myself at the end of this day where we've set everything up and then we've broken everything down and everything is done, and I'd look back and I would think to myself, wow, all of this work preparing this sermon, And it was only for 8 people. And it was short-sighted of me. But see, the thing is that we had the faith to start, and we started small. And now we can look back, as in a couple of weeks we're going to be celebrating our 8th anniversary. We can look back and we can say, wow, you know what? It's true. God never called us to be successful. God called us to be faithful. And as we were faithful, we became successful. So the first thing we have to do when we feel that pull to do something big is that we've got to take that first step, even if it's a small step. Because every long journey begins with that first step. And when we are faithful with the little things, that builds up our faith to get to the big things and to get the big things done. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start small. But the next thing that we're going to do is after we make that first step to start small, we're going to continue to step. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to take the next step. We're going to keep taking the next step. Look what it says later on in that chapter. It says, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, the Arab, heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. Scoffed contemptuously. This is what scoffed contemptuously would look like in a movie today. Ha 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 ha. That's probably not that good, but that's my best contemptuous scoffing. You see, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem were all leaders of their own community, their own tribes, their own people. And of course they would scoff because you know what? Anytime they needed something, whether they needed food or supplies or people, all they had to do was to go into Jerusalem. And there was no wall to stop them, and there was no army to keep them away. And so they would just go in and take whatever they needed and leave. And so when they saw this wall going up, of course they're going to say, ha 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 ha. That's never going to happen. Who do you guys think you are? In fact, they said, what are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king, they asked? And Nehemiah replies, he says, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall because you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. You see, what they did was they took the next step. They took the next step. Because getting to accomplish something big involves taking a lot of small steps consistently. You want to lose 20 pounds? Then find a plan and stick to it. And take that first step and then take the next step and the next step and the next step. You want to get out of debt? You want to live where you're not financially pressed all the time? Well, maybe you decide that the first thing you've got to do is you've got to have a $1,000 emergency fund, right? You want to have an emergency fund because here's the thing about an emergency fund. Let's say that you're driving around and you have a problem with your tire. You blow out 2 tires and now you have to get 2 brand new tires. If you have an emergency fund, then all you have is a tire problem. But if you don't have an emergency fund, now you have a tire problem and a financial problem. And so one of the steps that you need to take to get into a place of financial security is you want to have an emergency fund. And so you're thinking, well, how am I going to ever save $1,000? Do you know what $1,000 is today? For a lot of people, the idea of saving $1,000 is completely impossible. Where am I going to get $1,000? Well, I'll tell you, for us, you know where we started? Or where you can start right now? You just got to get rid of burgers, right? Stop going to fast food places, eat at home. Boba, stop going out for dessert. Bake a cake at home. Or Bucks. It's supposed to be Starbucks, but I wanted to go with the whole B thing, right? Burgers, boba, Bucks. Starbucks, coffee, Phil's, Panera, Pete's, the other guys. Listen, all great places, all great coffee. I go there myself. I'm not knocking those guys. I'm just saying that if you make the decision to pull back on those things, and look around your house and find a couple of things that you're spending more money and time storing, and you should just go out and sell them, you can be on your way to saving every month enough money so that you have a $1,000 emergency fund by the end of the year. You can do that. Maybe For you, your first step, your decision, your big decision is that you want to grow closer to Jesus. And so maybe for you, your first step is to find a Bible reading plan. And listen, if that is your first step and you want to find a good Bible reading plan, I'm inviting you to give me a call, to text me, message me, leave a comment here while you're watching, and let me know. I would love to be able to suggest a couple to you, some that you get right on your phone or on your tablet, and that you can follow along with, that are simple, that is that first step and gives you that next step to get to where you want to be. I love this quote from St. Francis of Assisi. He says, "Start doing what's necessary, then what's possible, then suddenly you are doing the impossible." And that's how it always is. In fact, when we see God's move all throughout Scripture, and even today when people, you talk to followers of Jesus who have seen God move in their lives, it always follows that same pattern. We start with doing what's necessary, and then we do what's possible, and pretty soon we see God do miracles. He does the impossible as we continue to take the next step. That's what Nehemiah did. Nehemiah didn't think about all of the steps and all of the decisions and everything that would happen. All he did was he took the next step for today. He started small, he took the next step, and what Scripture tells us is that Nehemiah and the people there in Israel were able to complete the entire wall around the city in 52 days. 52 days. There are people who can't remodel a kitchen. They can't remodel a bathroom. They can't organize their garage in 52 days. And Nehemiah was able to get the wall built in 52 days. There are engineers that have looked at the wall and what he had done, and they agree that, man, that was quite an accomplishment for him to be able to do that. See, once you begin to do what you set out to do, it builds momentum. And you end up having this momentum, this energy, and you just don't want to stop. Even when you realize that you're just getting started. Because a lot of times when we think of doing something big, that thing, and we get to it and we accomplish it, it's actually only the first step in the big thing that God really wants us to accomplish. You see, 52 days later, the wall was up, but they had only started to rebuild Jerusalem. They still had not rebuilt the economy. They had not rebuilt the culture. They had not rebuilt the neighborhoods. They had not rebuilt the temple. There were still so many other things to do. And that's how God is when He is directing our lives. When one thing is done, it's time for us to take the next step. Sometimes it's a step towards the big thing, and sometimes it's accomplishing the big thing and to get started again into the next thing. Craig Rochelle, who's a pastor and teacher, and who a lot of what this series is, we've been talking about this series, is based on a book that he wrote. He said this, and this quote, this really meant a lot to me when I read it. He says, "You will vastly overestimate what you can do in the short run, but you will vastly underestimate what God can do through you over a lifetime of faithfulness." We have a tendency to evaluate our lives over what we see right in front of us. And yet, if we look at what we can accomplish in a year or in a month or even in a week, it's not very much. But like with anything, with paying off our debt, with restoring our relationships, with losing weight, with getting an education, it's not about a short-term burst, and yes, we're done. It's about a day after day, decision after decision, step-by-step process, a small step every day that consistently, if we do it consistently, can make a huge difference in our lives. So we want to start small. We want to take the next step, keep taking the next step. And the third thing is that we want to be faithful, that we want to keep doing it, keep being faithful to what we are called to do, faithful to that pull of the Spirit. Paul, the Apostle Paul, writes this. He says, so let's not get tired of doing what is good. And listen, I get it. I know that sometimes the day in and day out of being faithful and being consistent and doing what we're called to do, even when we don't see the results, can tire you out. I know. But Paul says, let's not get tired of doing what is good, because at just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. So we start small, we take the next step, and then we be faithful. We keep going. We don't allow ourselves to fail, right? Failure is, to overcome failure, to be successful. I've heard this, you've probably heard a similar version of this, but success is simply falling down 7 times and getting up 8 times, right? It's not letting the drawbacks stop you from accomplishing your purpose. Being faithful just means doing something even when you don't feel anything. Doing something even when you don't see anything. Paul says, listen, I know sometimes you're not going to see it, sometimes you're not going to feel it, but don't grow weary. Keep dreaming big, but keep starting small. But most of all, start. Because you and I will never know what is on the other side of our decision to be faithful until we make the decision to be faithful. Because that small step that you take today, that small step that you decide to take in the right direction, just could be the biggest step that you'll ever take in your whole life. So as we look at the life of Nehemiah, we look at this part of his life, this significant chapter in his life, I want to encourage you that as you feel the Spirit's pull, and some of you, you're feeling it right now, but as you feel the Spirit's pull to do something big, then I just pray that you would start small, that you would take the next step and then be faithful. Don't grow weary, and know that as you continue to take those steps, that God will accomplish His purpose in your life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.